One of India's most beloved Prime Ministers and a truly national leader, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, has been cremated with full state honours. And joining us on the show this evening is a very special guest and long associate of Mr. Vajpayee. We are joined by none other than Yashwant Sinha. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha, for being with us. My deepest condolences to begin with. He's been called a poet, a political pragmatist, the high priest of coalition dharma, many such adjectives and many such names for Mr. Vajpayee. But how would you best describe the tall leader that Mr. Vajpayee was, and of course your former boss?
Well, I would say he was all this and more. He was a great leader of India. He was absolutely unmatched as a statesman in his time, and he had a grasp of things which only a person who has gone through the mill and has come to the top from the bottom would have. And I have noticed this in some other leaders also, that they have a very uncanny grasp of the problems of the country, the problems globally, and when they get the opportunity, they bring to bear on policies the imprint of their personality and their understanding. So Atalji was unique in that sense, and that's why I'm saying that he was all this and more, because he was also a great, good human being. And anyone who has worked closely with him would bear me out that he was always very affectionate, always very joyful, and you felt great assurance and happiness in his company.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people will talk about the company that he provided and how fatherly he was. But Mr. Sinha, you know, Mr. Vajpayee in many ways was, of course, the first non-Congress Prime Minister to finish a full term. He was also in many ways perhaps the best example and the best placed Prime Minister for the coalition era politics. He managed a coalition of 23 parties, did so amicably. There weren't these murmurs of dissent. He could go ahead and get in and usher in a lot of reforms. So in some sense, he was the best man for the job. He was the best man to be PM for the coalition era politics, was he not?
He certainly was a perfect Prime Minister because he believed in consensus. And I'd like to add here that he would have been an extremely successful Prime Minister under any situation, under any circumstances. But, you know, as far as coalitions go, you yourself mentioned that we had 20 odd parties supporting our government, and it was not always easy. There were moments where the opposition was within the party. There were moments when the opposition was also from the allies. Yet he encouraged all of us to take the most difficult decisions if they were in national interest. And I would say with great pride that as far as my role was concerned, as Finance Minister for over 4 years in his government, who presented 5 budgets, that Atalji stood like a rock solidly in support of those difficult decisions that one had to take in the interest of the nation. And he never at any time lose heart. There were occasions, of course, where because of the opposition within the party or opposition from the allies, we had to take a step back. There were politically very difficult decisions, especially relating to food subsidies and fertilizer subsidies. But even there we were able to make progress. So he believed in consensus. He believed in consensus all around, within the government, within the party, with his allies, and also with those who were in opposition at that time.
Mr. Sinha, you know, Atalji could perhaps achieve a lot even by running a coalition government that most of the majority government governments haven't been able to do, and even the present one, it has fallen short of expectations, because the kind of reforms that he could roll out and the kind of initiatives he could take on the economic front as well would have met resistance, not just from the opposition or from the Sangh or RSS and all of that, but even from members of within his party. Do you believe in some sense his everlasting legacy was that he could successfully firewall the government from the party?
No, I wouldn't say that he firewalled the government from the party. We had discussions with the party office bearers, including the president, and he took advice from every quarter, and this is what consensus is all about. So when I am talking of consensus, it includes the party, it includes the council of ministers, it includes the leaders of opposition parties, and more importantly, it includes the people of this country.
Mr. Sinha, you were his finance minister, and obviously Mr. Vajpayee wasn't a trained economist. He wasn't a high street financier as well. And he still could preside over some of the key economic legislation, FDI, GST, the infrastructure projects, the golden quadrilaterals. How could he ward off the desi economics, the pressure from the Sangh, from the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, to usher in what were key second generation reforms?
Well, I'm glad you have asked me this question, and I'd like to tell you that one does not have to be a trained economist to be able to understand the problems of the country. I noticed this in Mr. Vajpayee, and I have noticed this in all the top leaders of the country who have come through the mill, who have risen to the top through struggles from throughout their career from the bottom. And all these leaders, including Mr. Vajpayee, have an uncanny understanding of the problems of the country, whether they are social, political, foreign policy or economic, and they know exactly what has to be done. And then they listen to economists, they listen to all kinds of advice, and just take the right decisions. That is exactly what Mr. Vajpayee did. I mean, I remember my first budget of 1998. Before I started preparing the budget, I went to him for guidance, and I said, what should you like me to emphasize the most in the budget? And he said, you must take care of the farmers of this country. And therefore, not only in that budget, but in all my budgets, we gave primacy to agriculture, to the farmers, and took a large number of steps for improving their condition. So where did that come from? It came from long years of experience of public life in India. You refer to the FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. I was convinced that we needed to cut budgetary deficits, and I went to him, and he was equally convinced that we should do it, and then we prepared the draft of the bill, took it to the cabinet, and it was cleared without any difficulty, without any hesitation. So if you took a problem to Mr. Vajpayee, or if there was a problem and you went with a solution, he will immediately agree with it, because he knew that that solution was based on study and experience.
I do want to spend some amount of time talking about his foreign policy legacy. First, it was Lahore, taking that famous bus journey evoked a lot of sentiment. Then, of course, he tried to resurrect at Agra with Parvez Musharraf. He spoke at the Minar-e-Pakistan, much against the pressure, much against resistance from the Indian delegation. And he continued to make relentless efforts to broker peace with Pakistan. I'm going to be a little cynical to say, in today's context, he would have perhaps been labeled anti-national.
Mr. Vajpayee had a very, very clear understanding of foreign policy, of global issues. He had been the foreign minister of India, and since then he had an abiding interest in all international issues. So he brought to bear on the questions which arose in his time a certain approach which was unique. this improvement in the relationship with Pakistan was a subject very dear to his heart. So he lost no time in taking the bus to Lahore in order to take the initiative for an improving relationship with Pakistan. It's another matter that we were paid back unfortunately in Kargil terms, and it was a great blow to the effort that he was making. But he persisted, and I would like to tell you that the final document which was agreed upon between Pakistan and India in January 2004, when we had gone to Islamabad for the SAARC summit, was a very, very important document, because it was in that joint press statement that Pakistan admitted for the first time that it was using terror and violence and exporting them to India from its territory, and promised to desist from doing so. In return, we promised that we would resume the composite dialogue process. We lost power in 2004, so the Vajpayee line in all its entirety could not be taken forward. The UPA made its own efforts of peace with Pakistan, but we unfortunately haven't reached anywhere despite initiatives taken by the present government. So he realized that peace with Pakistan is a very important thing. Right. He realized that peace with China was a very important thing. He realized that improvement of relations with the US was a very important thing. He realized that all this had to be done without in any way impairing our relationship with Russia. And he skillfully managed to do all this and ironed out many of the things which were bedeviling our foreign policy.
Yes, absolutely. And he made a very earnest attempt, and his opponents vouch for that. And those visuals really bring back memories of how Atalji had gone all the way to Lahore in that bus. He had wanted to meet Mehdi Hasan, I remember, and he had said that Ranjish-e-Sahi used to be one of his favorite songs. As a young child, I remember watching all of that. But a quick final word to you, Mr. Sinha. How would Atal Bihari Vajpayee, or Atalji as he's fondly called, have handled today's politics? Today's politics is not the politics of the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. It's extremely trigger happy. It's very much in your face. It's absolutely acrimonious. It's abrasive in some sense. There are no political adversaries or opponents. They aren't political rivals. They're political enemies. That's what today's politics is. How would he have handled this today? Would he have been a misfit? I wonder.
Mr. Vajpayee was not, he didn't believe in all these things. He was a great Democrat. That's the first thing that comes to mind when we talk of politics. He was a great Democrat. I remember so many occasions. For instance, to give you an example, there was pressure on India from the US that we should send our troops to Iraq after the Iraqis had been won. Iraq had been won over by the US. They wanted India to send a military contingent, if not a military contingent, at least a medical unit of the army. And there was a national debate which was going on this particular issue. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, as leader of the Congress party, wrote him a letter. And what was the response of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee? He immediately invited her for a dialogue on this issue. And she came accompanied with all her top leaders, including the future Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh. And we had a discussion. She explained her point of view. And it was after consulting her, consulting other leaders of the opposition, that Mr. Vajpayee finally decided that India will not send its troops to Iraq. Now, that was building consensus on a very contentious issue. He always reached out to the opposition. Whenever there was an opportunity or the occasion so demanded, he reached out to the opposition. I'll give you another example. When the Americans went into Iraq in 2003, Parliament was in session and the Congress party started disrupting Parliament. and they were insisting that we must have a parliamentary resolution condemning the US action. I was against it, so I resisted such attempts. Parliament remained stalled for 3-4 days. Then Mr. Vajpayee called me and called the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, and he said he would not like Parliament to remain disrupted on this account, and therefore we should find a way out. We had a meeting with the Congress party leaders. We worked on a draft. A mutually agreed draft was prepared, and we consulted the other leaders in the opposition parties. They all agreed, and ultimately we had a parliamentary resolution. But we did not exactly condemn the American action. We couched it in such a language that it will not create problems for us in future. So that was Mr. Vajpayee, essentially a consensus builder. He would, I'm sure he would have hated what is happening in our politics today. And he never believed in this kind of politics in which, as you said, your political opponents are not only your political opponents, they are your enemies.
That's true, sir, and I don't think political opponents are your enemies, but that is the reality of today's political spectrum and across polities. Mr. Vajpayee, may his memory live on and may he live in peace. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha, for joining us.
Thank you.
With your account, your anecdotes and your descriptions of a man you called your leader. India continues to mourn the loss of one of its favorite sons, Atal Bihari Vajpayee.